Hey everyone, I'm here with Aaron Abramson. Aaron is the CEO of Jews for Jesus and also the author of Mission Design, subtitled Leading Your Ministry Through Organizational Culture and Change. This is the book if you're looking at it on YouTube. Aaron, welcome. How are you doing?
Great. Good to be with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you here. Aaron, just kind of tell us briefly what you do.
Yeah. So I serve as the executive director and CEO of Jews for Jesus. And I've been doing Jewish ministry or Jewish missions for about 25 years and currently residing in London.
Oh, okay. Oh, I did not know that. I know you're in New York at this very moment, but okay.
I am.
Um, well, okay. So here's my first question, and that is, I think many of us have heard about Jews for Jesus, and maybe some of us have connections with Jews for Jesus. But just tell us, what is Jews for Jesus?
Yeah. Jews for Jesus was started in the 1970s. It's an organization, a Christian organization that's actually comprised of Jewish people whose lives were completely transformed and turned upside down by discovering the Jewish Messiah.
Hmm.
And so, what do? We share that hope with other Jewish people who are curious, want to learn more about the New Testament. And so we meet with them one on one. We connect with them because most Jewish people, let's be honest, they're not just knocking on church doors and
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, how do I get in and how do I get saved?" And so, in a lot of ways, we try to just present the gospel to them in all sorts of different ways, and then disciple those that God is really drawing to Himself.
Yeah. That's amazing. I was sharing with you before we started. I had an uncle who was Jewish and had become a Christian. So I knew about Jews for Jesus from a young age, but yeah, I've never actually been really connected with Jews for Jesus or anyone who's involved in it. So I do as we talk today. I look forward to hearing more of the story of Jews for Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, people often kind of look at it and they're like, "Well, that's kind of a weird. Is that real? Like Jews for Jesus? Is that a
yeah,
contradiction in terms? Can you be Jewish and believe in
yeah.
Jesus?" They sort of wonder about that, and I always will go back to, well, the original followers of Jesus were Jewish and didn't like kind of feel like they couldn't be Jewish and that it didn't fit. They believed that they were following the very Messiah that Jewish people were waiting for. So for us,
Right.
it's kind of rather than us saying to Jewish people like, well, to believe this, you stop believing in, you stop being Jewish and,
Hmm.
all those things. And what we say is, well, if you are Jewish, then believing in Jesus should make even more sense because
Yeah.
we were the ones waiting for that Jewish Messiah.
That's right.
So
Yeah. And it was, in the earliest church, it was scandalous to think about Gentiles, right? Non Jews becoming followers of Jesus. How's that possible?
exactly.
Right?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, and you read
Yeah.
about those meetings, those intense church
Yeah.
council meetings where Paul and Barnabas and others eventually they say, no, it's a good thing for Gentiles to be for Jesus,
Yeah.
but initially that was strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would love to hear a little bit about your story and how you became a follower of Jesus. How did you come to believe that Jesus was the Messiah?
Yeah, so I was raised in a very typical Jewish family in a lot of ways, in that you'd be surprised, but a lot of Jewish families in North America are intermarried. And so I grew up in an intermarried Jewish family where my mom was from a Catholic background and converted to Judaism,
Mm,
and my dad was from the typical Jewish background.
okay.
And so raising us, they were trying to figure out how to do that,
Hmm.
And so I grew up with a little Christmas, a little Hanukkah,
Hmm.
a little Easter, a little Passover. We kind of
Huh.
did a lot of this
Interesting.
stuff. And whenever my friends would be like, "Isn't that confusing?"
Yeah.
The whole presents at Christmas and Hanukkah, I'd be like, "Getting presents twice is not confusing at all. I'm
Yeah.
good with it." Um, no, but in general, the idea for me growing up was that I grew up pretty open minded in the context I
Mm,
was in. My parents eventually
okay.
even became interested in Jesus
Hmm.
and
Well,
got involved in a messianic community at some point. But my journey would take me to Israel, and I was not a believer
okay.
as a teenager. And we left from the United States when I was 15 and moved to Israel and lived in an Orthodox environment. I went to an Orthodox yeshiva where you might go to become much more learned in the
Mm,
Torah, the
hmm.
Talmud, and all the Jewish writings, and ended up after a year, feeling somewhat disillusioned with traditional Orthodox Judaism. It just didn't.
Hmm.
I had questions like,
Hmm.
and I didn't feel like they were resolved in that season. Especially like, what does God want with me?
Yeah.
Does he want me for some, like, what is his
Hmm.
purpose for creating me? Like, what is that all
Hmm.
about? I didn't feel that I had received a sense of purpose being in the yeshiva.
Interesting.
And so when I was 18, I was drafted into the Israeli military, as
Hmm.
it's compulsory for all men and women to serve. And I served for
Right.
3 years.
Hmm.
And while I was in the military, I found myself drifting further and further away from God altogether.
Hmm.
In fact, if you had asked me at that point what I believed, I would have said I was an atheist,
Wow.
and at least agnostic, but probably an atheist. And a friend of mine who I had been in the yeshiva with actually got uh, kidnapped. He was a soldier and he got kidnapped, and he was killed in a pretty horrific way early into my season in the IDF, in the Israeli military, by Hamas terrorists,
Oh,
by these
wow.
guys that just kidnapped people and basically tortured him. And as an 18, 19-year-old, I didn't know how to handle that. And I was
Yeah.
just angry about it. Like, why would we be in this country? Why would God allow this to happen if he's real? All those
Yeah.
sorts of questions. And I resigned to leave Israel. And so when I was done
Hmm.
with my military service,
Hmm.
I saved up some money and I left to the United States. And I thought naively, all my problems are going to get solved when I come to America, right?
Hmm.
And so I come to America and my problems weren't solved.
Hmm.
And I felt in some ways more depressed and uncertain about my future and what, I was created for and all those things related to purpose
Yeah.
than ever. And so
Hmm.
it was during that time that God kept bringing these interesting people into my life that
Hmm.
claimed to love Jesus and love Jewish people,
Hmm.
and they happen to be Christian. And
Hmm.
I'd kind of, "No, I'm not interested. Thank you. No, I'm not," and
Hmm.
I'd kind of ignore them. But at one point, somebody just put it out there. "Hey, Aaron, have you read the New Testament for yourself?
Hmm.
Because I think that you're going to find the answers you're looking for
Hmm.
if you read it." And I just figured, well, what do I have to lose?
Hmm.
And opening up the New Testament was a supernatural experience for me. I can't explain it any other way. I just felt God's word just speaking directly to me. And it was
Yeah.
hitting me straight in the heart. And I remember just
Huh.
thinking, this Jesus is true. I don't know why. I don't
Wow.
know how I know it, but he's
Yeah.
really the Messiah. And the more I was reading about him, the more I found myself drawn to him. And
Hmm.
it was almost like he just said, "You're coming with me."
Hmm.
And I didn't know how to live as a Christian. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how, my lifestyle
Yeah.
was a mess at this point. And it was
Hmm.
around this point that I came back to Israel. And I gave my life to the Lord and I started to try to share that faith on the
Hmm.
streets of Jerusalem,
Yeah.
which was super challenging. Really
Hmm.
difficult environment to do that. And eventually found these other people that were working
Yeah.
with Jews for Jesus that were out trying to do it as well. And so that was
Yeah.
kind of my connection and how I
Okay.
got involved in Jews for Jesus as a
Okay.
volunteer initially.
Uh, you said you tried to just do it on your own at first. That's pretty
I
brave.
just would go out on the streets and try to talk to people at times. And, there were just different
Wow.
conversations I would have individually. In
Yeah.
fact,
Yeah.
two of my closest friends at the time, I remember I would pray these, those naive prayers as a
Uh
new
huh.
Christian, like, "Hey,
Uh.
Lord, just give me this." And I'm
Oh yeah.
praying for it. So, of course, in
Uh huh.
faith, and I
Yeah.
remember just being like, "Lord, if you want me, you're going to have my two close friends. One of them is an Orthodox Jew. The other one,
Hmm.
is still very traditional."
Okay.
And they both became believers in Jesus. It was like kind
Wow.
of a miracle. Yeah. And
Wow.
then all the three of us were studying the Bible all day and we were walking around Jerusalem
Yeah.
trying to share our story with
Wow.
other people. It was just a really exciting
Yeah.
experience to walk through that.
So, like, how hard is it? Because for a Jewish person to become a Christian, a follower of Jesus, like it seems to me like there are very strong, high cultural hurdles
Oh, yeah.
for that to happen. Like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of cultural baggage as a
Yeah.
result of history in between the
Yeah.
church and the Jewish community. Anti-Semitism
Mhm.
historically was
Mhm.
much of it was anchored in Christian
Mhm.
history and theology, and even it's even in our teachings. You're going to find things that Luther said and other
Yeah.
church fathers said about Jewish people, and
Mhm.
unfortunately, that really created barriers
Yeah. Yeah.
where Jewish people just felt like we don't belong there. That's not us. That's
Yeah.
like in some ways it's going to the enemy's camp.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, in a lot of ways, a lot of our approach doesn't really focus around how excited are you to become a Christian and join the
Mm.
church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our approach often is, let's talk about who Jesus was, and let's
Yeah.
try and dive into what his teaching is all about, and what
Mhm.
he's what this gospel message is all about. Because
Yeah.
the gospel isn't, you need to join, First Presbyterian Church of New York. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, sure, do we want them to be in fellowship? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the gospel is really about God's work of redemption
Yeah.
and how much he loves us and what he's been willing to do in order
Yeah.
to redeem us. And that story is a very Jewish story, that
Right.
idea of redemption. So it's kind of taking that story, which originally was embedded in Jewish
Mhm.
culture and tradition, and it's kind of
Yeah.
repackaging it again in
Yeah.
those same sort of
Yeah.
pictures, and it's not hard to do because Passover points to it, and the Feast
Yeah.
of Tabernacles points to,
Yeah.
Jesus stood in John chapter 7 in the temple on the last day of the feast, and he related directly to the Feast of Tabernacles. So it's
Interesting.
not like we're really going to have a tough time
Yeah.
finding connection points.
Yeah. Right. Right. Fascinating and kind of amazing. And it's kind of captured in the name Jews for Jesus too. You're not saying people who used to be Jews now for Jesus. You're still
Yeah.
a Jew, right? You're still Jewish. That's who you are, and now you're for the Messiah, the one that we believe is the Messiah. Yeah.
Totally. And
Yeah.
I never claim, because people say, well, sometimes the Jewish community will say, well, that's being deceptive
Mm,
because you
interesting.
represent more of a Christian worldview in your
Yeah.
maybe your philosophy or your
Yeah.
theology than you
Yeah.
would a Jewish. And I just go, look, Judaism is not just it's not just this one thing. There's a
Hmm.
spectrum today of what we call Jewish. You've got
Yeah.
Reconstructionist Jews, you've got Reform Jews, you've got Kabbalistic Jews, you've got
Yeah.
ultra Orthodox Jews, you've got
Yeah.
atheist Jews, you've got Jewish Buddhists, they call them Jew-boos. You've got all sorts of, like, it runs the gamut. And yet,
Wow.
if you become a believer in Jesus, in fact, in like Pew surveys and stuff,
Yeah.
what they do is they ask you in those surveys if you've accepted another monotheistic faith. And if you
Oh.
do, you're technically kind of at that point, you're Jewish ancestry, non Jew.
Oh.
So it's kind of a
Interesting.
weird thing because it's
Yeah.
almost like,
Yeah.
well, but even the rabbis will say, look, you're Jewish. You might not
Yeah.
be believing what we believe a Jew should believe in, but you're still
Yeah.
Jewish.
Yeah.
So I don't think, even if I wanted to stop being
Yeah. Yeah.
Jewish,
Yeah.
how would I do that? I was born into a Jewish family. I've
Yeah.
got Jewish DNA running through me. There's no
Yeah.
way I can really stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm curious, when a Jewish person's belief shifts from just Judaism to believing in Jesus, is it additive or subtractive, or you know what I mean? So what I mean is, when you said you've stopped believing some of the things that we believe, like what are the things that are subtracted? Because you're adding belief in Jesus, but it sounds like there are also some things that are subtracted in terms of beliefs. Like what are those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it kind of so again, like I said, Judaism is a spectrum. So you've
Yeah.
got Jews that maybe observe every single particular commandment in the
Mm,
Torah.
yeah.
Okay, which,
Yeah.
I mean, literally, you can go. So I mean, you've seen it. Like, don't wear a blended garment.
Right.
Okay, do you wear
Right.
a garment that has part cotton and part polyester? Nope, you
Yeah.
broke the Torah. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah.
So you can go all the way to that granular level, or you can just, say, maybe, for example, I try not to work on Shabbat, on the Sabbath,
Mhm.
or I try to not eat pork, or I try,
Mhm.
unkosher food like that,
Yeah.
or maybe I try to keep biblical kosher, or
Yeah.
there's different things. So Jewish believers in Jesus, depending on where they started, may
Hmm.
become more Jewish
Yeah.
actually and go, oh, now I celebrate the holidays. I never used to
Hmm.
celebrate the holidays, but now that I'm a believer in Jesus, I see
Oh,
beauty in them. And then you've got
interesting.
some Jewish people that were ultra orthodox and they were keeping every single commandment down to the
Yeah.
nth degree. Like I don't, you wait 6 hours or, even more between eating milk and then meat, things
Hmm.
like that. There's all sorts of rules around all sorts of things. And I only eat kosher that's glatt kosher or kosher, specific. There's different kosher levels even.
Wow.
So it gets most Jews who believe in Jesus are not going to necessarily become that granular,
Right.
but some of the ultra Orthodox Jews maybe subtract some of those things.
Oh,
And they
I
go,
see.
well, I
Okay.
don't feel the conviction that I need to keep doing that anymore.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I know Jewish people that they feel liberty and
Hmm.
they don't necessarily keep kosher. Maybe when they were
Yeah.
younger, they did, so it really runs the gamut.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Um, well, okay. So I'm curious how Jews for Jesus got started, and it has sort of evolved over time, at least in terms of strategy, and that's kind of what your book is about. And so I want to talk about that. So let's start. Let's now turn to how Jews for Jesus got started. How did that happen?
So Jews for Jesus was really birthed out of the Jesus movement in the 1970s. And so there was a whole group of young Jewish, kind of like people in their 20s that
Mhm.
there was a lot of social unrest and a lot of things that were happening in the United States, especially because it was a North American ministry to begin with. And they launched really as a group of volunteers that were committed and ready to really make a difference together. So you got to realize a
Right.
lot of these guys are protesting in Vietnam one day,
Mm.
and then they become sort of believers in Jesus.
Yeah.
And some of them think they're the only one, but there's
Mm.
more and more of them coming to faith at this point.
Mm.
And so they sort of come together and they say, look, we can do a lot more together than we could individually. And so
Hmm.
Moish Rosen was this catalyst. He had been in the Jewish mission field. He came to faith earlier. He
Yeah.
was already, I believe, in his 40s around this
Okay.
point, and
Mm.
was working for a mission called the American Board of Missions to the Jews here in New York
Mm.
City, kind of a longer name for
Yeah.
one of those old school mission boards back in the
Yeah.
day. And he ended up going out to California because all
Mm.
these hippies were out there. And he said, hey, let me experiment and try something. And he started to gather a core of
Mm.
volunteers. And as they were coming around him, I think there was this mutual understanding that where he was going, which became Jews for Jesus, and
Hmm.
where the American Board of Missions to the Jews, it was almost like new wine, old wineskins. It
Yeah.
was like, this isn't going to fit
Mm.
here, right?
Mm.
It's just so
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
And so he ended up kind of mutual, I guess, but he ended up going and starting Jews for Jesus in California, and we
Okay.
incorporated in the early 1970s, so 73.
Okay.
And it was funny because that word Jews for Jesus, or the name, it
Hmm.
just was a name that got attached to us. It wasn't like
Oh,
we went and sought after that name. In fact,
right.
I think Moish wanted a different name early on, but everybody
Mm.
just kept calling us, hey, you're those Jews for Jesus.
Oh.
And so we started out on campuses and on the streets of
Uh-huh.
San
Yeah.
Francisco. And, there were just so much energy in those early
Yeah.
days, and
Yeah.
people coming, people going, people getting saved in all sorts of radical
Mm.
ways.
Yeah.
And the mission was very contextualized at that point to that community. In fact, in the book, I put a little copy of like the first piece of literature that he
Oh,
produced. It was called A
yeah.
Message from Squares. Or it was a message from a square. And he was kind of saying, I'm this straight laced guy, but
Right. Mhm.
and he starts appealing to them as Jews, like beards they're biblical. And he's starting to, kind of relate in a funny way. He's contextualizing.
Yeah.
And we did that for
Yeah.
all those years.
Yeah.
And that was how the mission got
Yeah.
going.
And it was very targeted, right? From the beginning, it was reaching Jewish students, basically, is what it sounds like. Jewish young people at the time.
Yep. A lot of Jewish young people came to
Yeah.
faith,
Yeah.
tons. And, they were very contextualized, made
Yeah.
it very comfortable. I mean, in essence, if you were Jewish and you came home and
Yeah.
told your parents, guess
Yeah.
what? I just became a believer in Jesus.
Yeah.
Some of them would sit a funeral for you. They'd be like, "You're no longer
Wow.
Jew. You're no longer part of the
Wow.
family." Like, it was such a
Wow.
blow. So they
Yeah.
really found standing together and coming together
Mhm.
was the way that they can handle
Wow.
that kind of
Wow.
opposition.
Yeah.
And the Jewish community in those early days was pretty intense
Hmm.
because you got to realize this is just 25 years out, 30 years, not even out of the
Yeah.
Holocaust.
Yeah. Right.
So
Right.
the community was
Right.
so protective,
Yeah.
of, hey, we're gonna assimilate. What are you doing?
Right. Right. Um, Pretty amazing. And you talked about the strategy, the primary strategy. Well, why don't you describe that? What the primary strategy for evangelism was for Jews for Jesus?
Yeah, so our primary strategy for Jews for Jesus was very bold, very like, we're not going to apologize for who we are. We would go out and we handed out these like pieces of literature called broadsides. It was like,
Okay.
because back in those days, you got to realize that was an innovation on the books, that all,
Mm.
everybody had, like, they would hand out these booklets and they'd stand on
Hmm.
soapboxes and preach. And our team would go out and do drama on the streets and give out these like funny, very humorous pieces of literature, and people would
Huh.
literally collect them. They'd go around and be like, "I want another one. Do you have one?"
Wow.
Because we would think about topics that were happening in the culture and write them, and they were just really quirky and
Yeah.
different, and they were little trifold, simple pieces of paper. They're very inexpensive, and we hand out millions of them. So we would
Wow.
go out in New York City every summer, and we would have what we called our summer witnessing campaign and hand out
Okay.
like a million of these things.
Yeah.
I'm not even
And
kidding.
real quick, when
Like,
you say we, were you doing it? Was that before your time, or were you also part of
so I wasn't around with the team in the early days. I
it? Okay.
joined in the like 90s,
Okay.
but
Okay.
in
Just
the
curious.
1970s, we were still doing a lot of this in the
Okay.
90s, but in the
Okay.
1970s, they started doing it. And then into the
Okay.
80s. Yeah.
Okay. So go on. You can go on. Okay. I didn't
But
mean
what
to
we would
interrupt.
do
Yeah.
is we would connect with Jewish people. Often we would get contacts of
Yeah.
we'd meet Jewish person. Oh, that's interesting. And, hey, you mind if I reach out and follow up? And we would have Jewish missionaries essentially
Yeah.
reach out to them, sit down, look at God's word together. What does it
Hmm.
say? Who is the Messiah and all that? And
Hmm.
we saw a lot of people come to faith.
Yeah.
It really was amazing.
It was effective. It worked. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah. And then over time, you said you were still doing it in the 90s, but at a certain point, you came to the realization that it wasn't quite as effective as it used to be. Talk to me about that. What was that like?
Yeah. So I got on board with Jews for Jesus when we were still doing that stuff.
Okay.
And I didn't know a better way. I didn't think that there necessarily was a better way. It was like, hey, we're going out on the streets. We're talking to people every day. We're getting
Hmm.
contacts and things. And that was in, the mid to late 90s. And then we're now in, fast forward, it's like I come to New York City, and,
Hmm.
there were some fits and starts with some other projects and things like that. And like '05, '06, we're experimenting, '07 a little bit. But in 2011, I moved to New York City and I'm running our flagship work here. And, New York is home to around 2 million Jewish people. We had a large team here and
Hmm.
a lot of resources. And I'm looking around, and so just so you understand, I had started my tenure with Jews for Jesus when I first started as a missionary from 2000 to 2004 years, so
Okay.
till about the end of '03. I
Okay.
had been in New York City, and so I knew what New York was like in after 9/11 and all that. There was a lot of
Right.
openness and a lot of
Mm.
movement and stuff. When I came back in 2011 to run the branch,
Mm.
it was not the same.
Oh.
And there were some things that had changed. Like,
Mm.
we were in a digital age. People
Yeah.
weren't just standing on street corners anymore looking at flyers that somebody has. They were plugged
Right.
in with with headphones, and they were walking down the street with
Mm.
phones, and they were interacting with people on the other line and browsing the internet and all that kind of stuff. And so we just found it more and more difficult to actually connect with Jewish people who were in New
Yeah.
York. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, like, I don't know what we're doing. I don't know how this is, but this is not connecting with Jewish
Yeah.
people where they're at. We have to
Yeah.
figure out another way to connect with them.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
had no idea what to do. And the rest of the team is looking at me.
Mm.
They're all like, what do we do? How do we get new contacts? Because everybody's goal was to have a whole group of contacts that they were following up on, Jewish
Oh,
seekers. And
right.
we had so few of them.
Hmm. Okay. And so then what did you do? So you didn't have the answers. They looked to you to be the expert. You were not the expert, at least in
Yeah.
terms of what to do next. You were expert at what we've been doing, and you were
Mhm.
expert in terms of sharing faith with other Jewish people. But what's next? And so, what was your process then for kind of beginning to learn what's
Yeah.
next?
Well, the first thing I did is I stopped and prayed a lot because
Hmm.
I felt like the weight of the responsibility of finding a way to succeed and to connect with
Hmm.
those Jewish people that we were in New York to connect with. And I was like, I don't
Hmm.
want to waste resources, ministry time, personnel time, all that stuff. And I started to ask, is there another way? And I would go to my supervisors and I would go to like other mentors and I would read literature that was out there.
Yeah.
And the problem with all these things is that the literature that was out there, it's all research. It's based on what's been,
Hmm.
it's all,
Yeah.
there's wisdom in history. Don't get me wrong, but
Hmm.
we were emerging into a new era, a new generation. Millennials were kind of on the scene, and it was kind of like they were thinking different than my
Yeah. Right.
generation. I'm
Right.
kind of the Gen X, and then there was
Yeah.
the Boomers, and
Yeah.
there were only a few of us kind of Gen X on staff at the time. So,
Hmm.
here I am, and they're like, "Go relate to younger people, and why don't they want to be involved with us?" It was kind of
Yeah.
that type
Right.
of thing.
Yeah.
And so I started to go out and look around for other people that were trying to think about this stuff, and
Hmm.
one of the places I went was at the time, Tim Keller had come out with Center Church, which is a
Hmm.
book that he published a number of years back. And they launched the City to City Church Planning Network. Now, I wasn't a church planner, but I
Hmm.
found him asking questions around theological vision and understanding the community you're trying to reach and
Yeah.
what are the particular gospel implications
Hmm.
for them. So it was like the starting point of kind of some vocabulary and
Yeah.
thinking through it theologically. But then I also felt like, well, I don't have a process. I don't know where to
Mm.
go from here. I don't know what to do. Fine. Let's say I understand some things about my community. Where do I go?
Yeah.
And I found myself searching online. I ended up going back to school, and I went to this Masters of Public Administration program through NYU. It was an executive program with a lot of other leaders that were like me in the nonprofit sector, and they were all trying to change the world.
Mm.
They all had their different answer to what it was,
Yeah.
whether it's clean water over here, or whether it's uh, addressing the homeless
Mm.
problem and challenge here in New
Yeah.
York,
Right.
or whether it was the JCC and some of the things that the JCC was, the Jewish Community Center. They were
Oh,
trying to
okay.
figure out a lot of the same questions. So
Mm.
it was a lot of these other, plus like even police force people were in the
Mm.
program in New York City. A lot of like uh, public sector kind of stuff, and it was just trying to understand, like, how do you measure intangibles,
Yeah.
right? How do you track growth and improvement in a
Yeah.
very intangible and very sort of um, it's a very murky, almost
Mm.
mercurial kind of approach
Uh-huh.
to the work we do.
Yeah.
How do you know that more Jewish people now are impacted and considering
Right.
the gospel? It's very
Right.
challenging to really know
Right.
how effective you are. It's one thing if you're saying, we're a homeless shelter and we had 100 people that were in the beds over the last month, and now it's 200. You could
Right.
see 100% growth.
Right.
In our context, it was very difficult to see sometimes how God was at work. So
Yeah.
I went back, and I also didn't have an understanding of how to prototype or innovate. I was just off the
Mm.
cuff doing intuitive things, and
Mhm.
I ended up taking a class that was run by a team that was through IDEO. And
Mm.
IDEO is this human-centered design. They're a company essentially, and they
Yeah.
help solve problems for governments, for
Mm.
companies like anyone from Apple to Google to the New York transportation system, or you
Yeah.
could pick like all sorts of things. They can
Yeah, yeah.
tackle a problem like, why is New York very difficult for elderly populations to navigate? And
Mm.
maybe the city will hire IDEO to help them
Mhm.
work through and walk this problem through. And the way they do it is they use something called design thinking. And so
Okay.
I became fascinated with this.
Yeah.
And a lot of
Yeah.
the agile, I don't know, these are terms that are used
Mhm.
in the business sector, but they're just, they're very, and we talked about this a little, they're very adaptive disciplines. They're disciplines that wrestle with questions and they put people at the center. Like, You're not just making a new chart or a new pamphlet. To me, to Jews for Jesus, creativity and before that had been a little bit like, okay, let's be creative. Let's come up
Yeah.
with a new pamphlet.
Right.
Well, maybe you don't even have a pamphlet. Maybe you're trying to do something and the pamphlet isn't getting you there. So
Right.
really, design thinking takes you into the heart of that process. It takes you through empathy and understanding the audience and the community you're trying to reach,
Mm.
really getting a sense of their needs and what are those needs, what are the opportunities that are presented
Yeah.
through those needs. And then
Wow.
once you understand that, you can
Yeah.
begin to design to meet
Yeah.
those needs,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
it's a after school program for kids of single moms or whether,
Yeah.
I mean, the list is,
Yeah.
it's immense, and you throw everything at the wall, and then,
Yeah.
you really test it out when it's small. The idea
Yeah.
of all of this is a minimum viable product, right? A very
Right.
small,
Right.
easy to try, cheap
Yeah.
experiment that gives you an
Yeah.
indication of whether it works or doesn't work. And
Yeah.
you build off of that.
Wow. And so you did that with Jews for Jesus. You said the first thing I love. The first thing you said was empathy for your neighbors, essentially the people in your community or the people that
Mhm.
you're trying to reach. How did you develop that empathy and learn about the people that you're trying to reach? How did was that the first step? And if so, then how did you do that?
That's a really good question, because here's the thing. And I sort of say this at one point. I think I say this in the book somewhere, but I say,
Uh-huh.
you know, the good news, we were trained missionaries.
Hmm.
The bad news is that we were trained missionaries. Like, in other words,
Yeah. Right.
we had this understanding that we knew already. We
Yeah.
already understood the Jewish community. We had been trained. We understood Jewish culture.
Hmm.
We understood all these different things, right?
Yeah.
And what that kind of did was it made us, in some ways, not ask those fundamental questions, because we
Mm.
kind of felt like, well, we kind of already know,
Yeah.
right? And what we were trying to do was say, hey, let me get to know this Jewish person again. And and
Yeah.
here's this other piece. This is very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
We used to just read the Jewish rejection of Jews for Jesus as the Jewish rejection of Jesus.
Mm.
So, in other words, if somebody doesn't like what your church is doing, or they don't like what your mission group is doing,
Yeah.
it's just, well, there's gospel resistance,
Mm.
right? And we
Yeah.
know that in the scriptures, Paul had a lot of gospel resistance. So you look to the scriptures and go, yeah, look at it. We're right on track here.
Right.
But what you might not be realizing is sometimes the resistance or the obstacle is maybe just your approach. It could be as simple as, the services are too early in the morning for me to get my kids up and make it to church. And they
Yeah.
just don't do it.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, well, they might not love Jesus. And you're
Mhm.
right. They probably don't. That's why they don't come to church, even when it's early in the morning. So, in a sense, when we went out again, and I just told the staff, I gave them permission to
Mhm.
go out and just learn, just
Mm.
become learners again. And
Yeah.
the key to learning is
Mhm.
listening.
Mm.
And just, you can ask an open-ended question and you listen,
Yeah.
and you just
Yeah.
understanding what a person's heart is. And I think as preachers, as missionaries, we're taught to talk,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
have the answers. I'm
Yeah.
supposed to say the gospel, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
a great thing. I'm not telling people don't go out and say the gospel,
Yeah.
and I'm not telling pastors don't preach from your pulpit. But what I am saying is we need to cultivate this empathetic listening, where
Yeah.
we're understanding why a
Yeah.
person really has a challenge. And let me just tell you one quick anecdote.
Yeah.
My professor at NYU, she was the one who taught um, kind of like communications and
Uh-huh.
sort of marketing for nonprofits and charity work and stuff. And she's a
Mhm.
lawyer, Jewish, from New York City. And
Okay.
after class one day, her name is Melissa, and I said to her, "Hey, Melissa, can I talk to you for a minute?" And she goes, "Sure." And so we're walking to like the
Uh-huh.
train at Union Square from NYU, which is like
Yeah.
maybe a 20-minute walk. And as we're walking, I'm saying to her, "Look, I work with Jews for Jesus." She goes, "I know." She goes, "I'm Jewish, okay?" And I
Yeah,
go,
yeah.
"Okay, interesting." And we're walking. I said, look, I feel, and I had this question around,
Mhm.
there's a lot of baggage
Mhm.
around Jews for Jesus. Just people assume, like they say things like, are you a cult? Are you this? You're not
Oh,
even Jews. There's a lot of
yeah.
misunderstanding. And I
Mm.
said, how do you really improve a brand?
Yeah.
And she just said to me, hey, Aaron, I just want to let you know, I grew up in New York. I'm Jewish. Jews for Jesus maybe has the worst brand in the Jewish
Oh,
community. That's what
wow.
she told me.
Yeah.
And it hit me like really hard. She didn't actually use those words. She said, Jews for Jesus has the another
Go
word for crappy, the
Okay,
crappiest
yeah,
brand.
yeah, yeah.
She just put it out there.
Oh, okay.
And I went, okay, tell me why. And she
Huh.
goes, you guys are just annoying and you're in my way. And she goes, and you
Mm.
know what? I actually don't have a problem with Jesus.
Hmm.
And that was like a dagger because it was like,
Yeah,
what? Like you're open to talk about Jesus, but like you're
but I'm
angry
in
that
the
I'm out
way.
here.
Oh,
And so I
yeah.
realized like maybe some of the things we were doing were reinforcing the wrong stereotypes and the wrong things
Mm.
that we just don't want people to think. And what she said, I brought back to our team. And
Yeah.
they were kind of like, great, you know. And we just
Wow.
had this whole conversation around it. And what it did was it led us to become more understanding and empathetic of how a lot of Jewish people who perhaps have said no to Jesus,
Yeah.
maybe they were actually saying, no, I don't like your approach and what
Yeah.
you're offering me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those are the hard. That's the hard side of learning, right? There's the joyful part where I'm like, "Hey, I learned something new. Oh, good. Now we have more clarity." But then there's the hard part where I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I've been in my own way, or in Jesus's way. I've been the obstacle." And but
Totally.
still, but still, what a gift to learn that, right? Because
It was priceless in a lot of
yeah,
ways.
yeah,
Yeah.
because now you can then begin to imagine new possibilities or new ways. Um, so okay, so then what? Then you began to
Well, then
implement.
the hard work started
Yeah,
because then I had to go back to our our mission, and you know how it is.
yeah,
Everybody's there. Change is hard, and
yeah,
so if you come into a room and you go, "Hey, none of this is working," or you know what I mean,
yeah,
and I wasn't the most mature in how I approach stuff, so I'm just
yeah,
going, "This stuff we're doing isn't connecting. It's not working," and you know, so you have this kind of like, well, it's worked, and you know, sharing the gospel is tough work, and sometimes
yeah.
you're going to have resistance, and you know, so you had these different voices, but one of the things that I believe strongly in is when you can prototype and show that
Mm,
something can actually work, or it
yeah,
can even work better than what you were doing before.
yeah.
And so you need some objective criteria. Otherwise, it could become a bit of a, you know, what you call success theater sometimes, you
Mm,
know, where you're just great, you know, look at all the great stuff we're
right.
doing. And we tell these anecdotes and people can
Yeah,
get enamored by storytelling. But
yeah.
if you can kind of actually say, hey, we've seen 20% more Jewish connection and Jewish
Mm,
contacts coming in
hmm.
as a result of this website page versus the old one. Well, guess what then the staff want? They want
Right,
that new one, right? They don't,
right.
even though sometimes it's hard to navigate change, and some
Yeah.
staff resisted and pushed back, and
Hmm.
some staff over the last number of years moved on from Jews for
Hmm.
Jesus. But I would say the
Mm,
majority just said, yeah, this is exciting. Let's see what
mm,
God can do through this. And,
mm.
you know, we kind of said, look, the gospel is never going to change,
Yeah,
but the methodology and the
yeah.
approach that we take to share it is going
Right.
to, it needs to constantly
Yeah,
change. And if
yeah,
we're stopping that process from happening, then
yeah,
we're going to just get calcified. We're going to
yeah,
stagnate. It's
yeah.
just how it is.
Um, So you kind of have, would you say that you have reinvented the way Jews for Jesus does its work? Uh,
Completely. I mean, I would almost say what we did was we took our evangelistic, our theological vision and
mhm.
our evangelistic methodologies,
Yeah.
you know, and we deconstructed them and really started asking hard questions like, what is
Yeah.
it we're really trying to achieve? And
Hmm.
what is it that the Jewish people need in order to see true transformation?
Yeah.
And when we did that, it opened up a whole slew of possibilities. And
Mm.
so today, what we advocate for is rather than a one size fits all approach,
Yeah.
because the mission was a lot more of a one size, like everybody went out and handed out
Right.
tracts. It was kind of the same deal,
Right. Right.
no
Right.
matter where you were. Now, what we do is we have something we would use, which is, and the book talks about this mission design.
Hmm.
It's a lot more about audience centric communication. And
Mm.
it's just as simple as when is your audience? Where are they? And what are they
Yeah.
listening to? And when are they available?
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're trying to talk to, you know, I've got three teenagers and you try to talk to them at 7:30 a.m. in the morning, no, you're not
Right.
going to get
Right.
anywhere. But if you're up at like 11:30 at night,
Yeah.
like my wife and I sometimes
Yeah. Right.
will joke because our kids suddenly want to talk to us at 11:30 at
Right.
night. You just make yourself available.
That's
So
right.
I feel like that is at its simplest form what we've taken across the board. So depending on what Jewish community we're reaching, because we used to
Yeah.
just say Jews, right? Now
Mm.
we're like ultra Orthodox Jewish men that are younger
Mm.
in yeshiva, like those
Uh-huh.
schools, or we might say college students at NYU, or it might say faculty at NYU, or it
Mm.
might say Jewish artists in New York
Yeah.
City. There's all sorts of different kind of, and then we'll
Yeah.
sort of design to meet the needs of those
Yeah.
communities. So walking through that now is an iterative process. It's constantly
Hmm.
changing. It's fluid.
Yeah.
So our approaches are very different depending on the cities you're
Yeah.
in and the
Yeah.
ministries that those cities are concentrated on.
Yeah.
And we share with one another. Like we have
Yeah.
coffee shops in some places because that's really a great way to just sit down with somebody and open up a conversation.
Right.
And it's a great, third spaces are great.
Right.
We have arts ministry because art is a great way to connect with
Yeah.
people and talk
Yeah.
about something deeper and transcendent. So yeah, I'd say that's
Yeah.
kind of how we approached it.
Yeah. So and so you have people all over the country, all over the world, like at different teams in different places, and they're all doing this work sort of in their own places, learning new things that are unique to those places. And then, just out of curiosity, do you or someone kind of coach your teams on how to do this? Yeah.
That's a great question. Yeah, so we went through some of the things in the book. I have some of the
Hmm.
templates we used in the book, and so we did this
Yeah.
whole thing around key audiences. So we
Hmm.
want you, like, if you're in Berlin, we have a team in Berlin. We have teams in
Okay.
different cities around the world. So we have
Okay.
a team in Berlin. They're doing ministry to particular audiences, and I said, okay,
Okay.
well, let's drill down into what your key audiences are. They've got a Russian-speaking Jewish audience.
Hmm.
And they've got a Hebrew speaking Jewish audience. Ironically, in Germany, well, not
Interesting.
so shocking, there aren't that
Yeah.
many German speaking Jews. They're
Oh.
mainly
Huh.
coming in from other countries. And so
Interesting.
they've settled in Germany
Hmm.
in the last number of years. And so there's probably 100,000 or so that have come in and settled.
Hmm.
And a lot of them, the needs are completely different if you're talking to Israelis or you're talking to Russian speakers. So what we've done is we've said, okay, let's work on understanding the Russian speakers and the Israelis, like the needs, right? The empathy, the
Uh-huh.
coming alongside the design thinking process. And let's begin to prototype ministries that will connect with this group and this group.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what they do is they present their plans and we walk
Yeah.
them through and we look at how we actually track impact throughout our
Yeah.
organization. And so we'll see it,
Hmm.
start to sort of, we'll get lift. We'll start to see it take off and we'll say, hey, what's going on there? Okay, let's talk about that. And the teams have been trained on how to do this now.
Nice.
So each of the leaders, we want them to be exploring new avenues and,
Yeah.
not stagnate in what they're doing.
Yeah.
So the goal is to really kind of roll it out across the board, which
Yeah.
is, we've done that. And so
That's great.
now our chief operating officers walk them
Uh-huh.
through it. I walk them through it. Sometimes we kind of have directors in those local areas that'll kind
Nice.
of work through things with them and fine tune stuff. And so
That's amazing. And you give a great little example in the book, something that you called bruise for Jesus, which I think is, can you just briefly tell us that story, how that came about? Because even in the way you tell the story, someone just threw it out as a crazy idea in a brainstorming session, just the words. But so tell us how that developed and how you prototyped that and how it became effective.
Yeah, totally. So there was this point where we were saying, look, we've come to New York. We're here in the city. Like Jews for Jesus has been here since, the very earliest days. And we really started off as a campus ministry and we got to get back out there. So we started to go back out on the campuses and we were trying to figure out, how do we connect with students? And here we are, we're going out there with gospel literature, we're doing creative stuff, trying to connect with people.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, what we realized was they didn't know they needed Jesus. They didn't think they could even talk to us. They were like, you guys are nuts. Like, we don't know who you are. We don't know why, as a Jew, why would I talk to you? Right.
Yeah.
And so what we realized was we wanted to do a couple things. We had a couple observations. One, we weren't really human to them. We wanted them to be able to interact with us to see, hey, these are thinking Jewish stories. These are just like me, like I can relate to this guy or this woman.
Yeah.
And so we wanted that proximity to close the gap.
Yeah.
That was one. Number two, we wanted to kind of overturn some of those stereotypes that people had that, hey, this is a cult. They're all handing out tracts and they're all out there doing that. So what we did was we said, we're not doing that. We're going to do something. We're going to give them something different. And the idea was to show we're going to add value. And what do students need? And we started to brainstorm. What do they need? They need lots of coffee. We were kind of joking about it because like when I was a student at the time at NYU, I was like, there's not enough places to sit and have coffee in the area. So we literally just played around with this idea. Somebody was like, well, what about brews for Jesus? You know, Juice for Jesus, giving out brews for Jesus. And we branded the whole thing and did like hashtag, brews for
Yeah.
Jesus and all this
Yeah.
stuff. And we just made it very compelling and well branded, like
Yeah.
throughout the campus. It was really
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
And we would do it on all the campuses, Baruch, NYU,
Okay.
Columbia, we started going to
Yeah.
all the campuses, and we would have, I'm not even kidding you. Like it was, I think 80 or 100 gallons. So imagine
Wow.
100 gallons of
Yeah.
coffee would
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
It'd be gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We'd have lines down, and all we were
Yeah.
doing was cold brew coffee. We did it really in the summer, and it was really
Okay.
good quality
Huh.
coffee. And we just gave it out for free and said, and they asked why. And
Yeah.
we said, well, we're Jews for Jesus. We're giving
Yeah.
out this brews for Jesus
Yeah.
as a way to bless the community.
Yeah.
And we just want to be a blessing here. And
Yeah.
that right there started a different kind of conversation with the Jewish community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, the greatest thing was like when I was in class at NYU
Yeah.
doing this marketing
Yeah.
class, they like
Yeah.
actually, somebody brought in our cup and was like, professor, and they're like, this is a great example of like marketing. You
Yeah.
want to communicate, look at what they're doing. So it was just kind of
Huh.
a funny
Yeah.
confirmation that we were getting through.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I mean, you didn't know it was going to be successful or effective from the beginning. And so you prototyped and you iterated, right?
Yep. Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, what did that look like? Like, how did you start, and what were the little things that you tried along the way?
Oh my goodness. So the first time I remember just being like, hey, what if we just gave out coffee? And we just went out with like, I don't know, a thermos and something.
Yeah.
And it just looked janky and weird. Like
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
were like, yeah, I'm not taking coffee from that person. Like you look like, who knows what's in that cup,
You're right.
And so we just decided to sort of refine it. And
Yeah.
we tried it one time. The coffee didn't work right. We tried
Yeah.
it again. Didn't work right. And we kind of realized like it was even small things like, where do you
Yeah.
stand when
Yeah.
you give out a cup of coffee? Like anything like that,
Mm.
And so what we ended up doing was we realized like people don't want you handling their food and all that. So gloves, trays, things like that, just small things said. And then pretty soon we just, through a couple of different iterative processes, we figured it out, and it was like
Yeah.
going like hotcakes. I mean,
Yeah.
and they would literally go, where are you? We want you to be
Yeah.
here. Like, are
Yeah.
you coming? So
Yeah.
it was just a way for us to connect with students. It was a lot of fun. And the cool thing is when it created a big line, it actually worked in our favor because everybody would stand in line and they'd say, what is this?
Yes.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. That's amazing. And then, and you got people's contact of info sometimes, and we're able to follow up, and that's kind of how that
Tons
worked.
of contacts.
Wow.
Yeah, that was,
Yeah.
and we were tracking it all too live.
Yeah.
So we would get every day, we would be getting
Yeah.
contacts. We would track it
Yeah.
all live,
Yeah.
and just we would send it in, making sure that people understood
Yeah.
like what campus we were
Yeah.
seeing impact, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
just a lot of fun to
Yeah.
see, and then we'd follow up and we go back
Yeah.
on the campus, and
Yeah.
so now we own 4 coffee shops.
Oh,
Why do
wow.
we do that? Because we discovered that students want a place to hang out, and
Yeah.
so we just said, "Hey, we'll be that place." And so
That's amazing.
we have one on UCLA, and people think coffee shops. I've seen church coffee shops and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ours are just there's very few Christians in ours. This is just city coffee shops. They're businesses, and we
Okay.
want them to be competitive with the coffee market. But then you'll see if you come into ours, little indicators throughout the coffee shop. Oh, wait a minute. This is owned and operated by Jews for Jesus, and the people who work here are Jewish and they believe in Jesus. And we'll talk about it from time to time, but we're not like running at you with a piece of literature right when you come in the door or anything like that.
Yeah.
But we have a co-working space upstairs and an art gallery next door. And, there's just a lot of activity
Wow.
in New York, for example, in LA and Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, different places. So,
well, that's amazing. I have loved getting to learn so much talking to you just now about Jews for Jesus. I had no idea, the kind of work that you guys were doing. All I knew was that back in the, when I was a little boy, essentially in my teens, that it was a, Jewish evangelistic organization or something. But I didn't even know, I didn't know what you were doing these days, but it sounds like you guys are doing really, really good work. And I think that's exciting.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you, I think sometimes people, even in the book or whatever, they might go, well, it worked. And we failed so much along the way. And made some dumb decisions as
Yeah,
a
yeah,
leader and
yeah,
thought, oh, this is the right thing, and then it turned out it
yeah,
wasn't. So what I
yeah.
like to tell people is, if we can figure it out, you can absolutely, it's doable. Like, we
That's
were
awesome.
kind of an organization that was struggling in a lot of areas. And I
Yeah,
think we're still learning and we're still growing, but I think even just
yeah,
keeping that posture of learning is
yeah,
so important. And if you can do that, I think change is possible.
yeah, yeah. I love that. Yeah, if we can keep learning, change is possible. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for yeah, just sharing your story. And I feel like I said, like I learned a lot. I think everyone listening has learned a lot. If people wanted to find out more about you and the work that you guys are doing, where could they go?
Yeah. So our website, jewsforjesus.org, is there's a lot of different, video content and resources. We
Uh-huh.
have a platform on YouTube called So Be It, with a lot of
Mm,
videos we do on the street, and we connect
mm,
with your everyday Israeli, and just you'll hear conversations with
mm.
people. It's really interesting.
Yeah,
I think you'd enjoy it if you get to check that out. I'm on the website. You can see articles and things that I've put out, and different videos, that our team is doing. And if you know somebody Jewish and they're saying, "Hey, I think I'd love to connect them with Jews for
yeah,
Jesus," or "I'd like resources on how to reach Jewish people,"
yeah,
on our website, we have something called the Jews for Jesus classroom, where it's free. You just sign up and you can there's classes
yeah.
that you can take that are video, and they kind of give you a little bit of understanding around Jewish culture
Cool.
and some practices that can help you as you get out there and share. So
Awesome.
we want to be a resource. We want to help you if
Yeah.
there's anything, you're curious about or want to know, or if you're a pastor and you want
Mm,
to have Jews for Jesus share maybe a Passover presentation, or you want us to come and talk about
mm,
mission design or something like that.
mm.
More than happy to do that. Love
Love
to
it.
do it.
Love it. Love it. Well, Aaron, thank you. This has been great, and just really grateful for you and for all the good work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Appreciate you too, man.